The room went silent the moment Dante Moretti raised his glass and pointed it at her. Elena Voss stood near the back wall of the grand hall, holding a drink she had not touched, when the man everyone in the room feared decided to make her the punchline of his speech. 200 guests turned to look at her. Crystal chandeliers threw hard light across marble floors. Dante smiled the way a man smiles when he already knows nobody will challenge him. He called her a nobody. He called her replaceable. He said the family kept her around the way you keep an old calculator, useful until something better comes along. The room laughed. Waiters kept moving. Nobody stopped to notice that Elena's hand did not shake, that her face did not turn red, that she simply set her glass down on the nearest table and walked toward the exit with the calm of someone who had already decided this night would be the last time anyone spoke to her that way. Nobody in that hall knew who she really was. Elena Voss had spent 2 years inside the Moretti organization, keeping their books, smiling at their parties, memorizing every account number whispered in hallway conversations. She was not simply an accountant. She reported to a federal agent named Nathan Cole, and inside a small apartment across town, she kept records that could bring down an empire built on decades of quiet corruption. Dante Moretti had just made the worst mistake of his life, and he did not even know it yet. The car ride home felt longer than usual. Elena watched the city lights blur past the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. She thought about her father, a small business owner who had lost everything years earlier, when men connected to the Moretti family forced him into debts he could never repay. She thought about the quiet nights she spent studying ledgers until her eyes burned, cross-referencing shell companies, matching names to numbers nobody was supposed to notice. She thought about the years she had spent building trust with people who would have destroyed her without hesitation if they knew the truth. Tonight, humiliated in front of the entire organization, something inside her finally settled into place. She was done waiting. At home, she poured a glass of water and sat at her small kitchen table. Her phone buzzed. A single message from Nathan Cole. Confirm the meeting. Tomorrow, 6 in the morning, the usual location. She typed back one word, confirmed. Elena looked around her apartment, at the modest furniture, the stack of financial textbooks on the shelf, the framed photograph of her father from before everything fell apart. She had built this life carefully, piece by piece, patience layered over patience. Dante's laughter still echoed in her ears, the way the room had laughed with him, the way nobody had defended her. It did not matter anymore. By morning, 2 years of careful work would finally move forward. She opened her laptop and reviewed the files one final time. Rows of numbers that told a story most people would never understand. Payments disguised as consulting fees. Properties bought under false names. Money moved through countries most guests at that gala could not find on a map. Every entry connected to a decision Dante Moretti had made, believing nobody would ever trace it back to him. She had traced all of it. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a colleague inside the organization, a woman named Grace Whitfield, who worked in the family's private security division. Grace had seen the humiliation happen and wanted to check if Elena was all right. Elena replied with a simple thank you, careful not to reveal anything. Grace did not know Elena's secret. Nobody did. That was the entire point. Sleep did not come easily that night. Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment Dante's words had cut through the room, the way his associates had smirked, the way nobody had stepped forward. She thought about her father again, about the quiet dignity he tried to hold on to even as everything was taken from him. She thought about the promise she made herself the day she decided to walk into this dangerous world disguised as nothing more than a number cruncher. She would not be the one erased from this story. Dante would be. By 5 in the morning, she was already dressed and ready, sitting in her car outside a small diner on the edge of the city, waiting for Nathan Cole to arrive. When his car pulled up beside hers, she felt something close to relief. Nathan stepped out, a tall man in his 40s with tired eyes and a calm voice that always steadied her nerves. He slid into the passenger seat of her car and looked at her carefully. "You look different today," he said. "I feel different," she answered. Last night changed something. She told him everything about the gala, about the humiliation, about the moment she decided there was no reason left to hold anything back. Nathan listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable, the way it always was when he was processing information that mattered. When she finished speaking, he nodded slowly. "Then let's finish this," he said. "Give me everything you have." Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a small drive, the culmination of 2 years of careful, dangerous, exhausting work. She placed it in his hand and felt the weight of the moment settle over her. "This is not just numbers," she said. "This is everything. Every account, every transaction, every connection between Dante and the people who helped him hide it all." Nathan turned the drive over in his fingers, studying it like it held more value than anything he had held before. "Do you understand what happens once we move on this?" he asked. "There is no walking back once these files are in motion." "I understand completely," Elena said. "I have understood since the day I decided to do this." Nathan studied her for a long moment, then nodded again. He stepped out of the car and walked back to his own vehicle, the drive secured safely in his jacket pocket. Elena watched him leave, her heart pounding with something between fear and relief. She sat there for a while longer, staring at the empty road ahead, thinking about the last 2 years, the parties she attended with a fake smile, the conversations she memorized word for word, the nights she spent decoding financial patterns most people would find impossibly boring, patterns that told the true story of an organization built on exploitation and fear. She thought about the moment last night when Dante mocked her in front of everyone, believing she was powerless, believing she was insignificant. He had no idea what he had just set into motion. Driving home, Elena allowed herself a small, quiet breath of something like peace. For 2 years, she had lived a double life, terrified of a single mistake that could cost her everything. Now, for the first time, she felt the weight begin to lift, even as she understood the most dangerous part of this journey was still ahead of her. She parked outside her apartment and sat in silence for a moment, watching the sun rise over the city. Somewhere across town, federal agents were already reviewing the files she had given them. Somewhere in a mansion built on stolen fortunes, Dante Moretti was still asleep, unaware that his world was about to change forever. Elena stepped out of the car and walked toward her building, her mind already turning to what came next. She knew there would be no turning back. She knew the coming days would test every ounce of courage she had built over the past 2 years. But for the first time since she began this dangerous mission, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt ready. As she reached her apartment door, her phone buzzed one final time. A message from Nathan Cole, just 3 words. "It has started." Elena closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself, then opened the door and stepped inside, ready to face whatever came next. The humiliation Dante intended to bury her under had instead lit the fuse of his own downfall, and by the time he understood what he had done, it would already be far too late to stop it. 2 days earlier, before the gala, before the humiliation, before any of it, Elena Voss had been a different person entirely. Or at least, that is what most people believed when they looked at her. To understand how a quiet accountant ended up holding the fate of a powerful organization in her hands, one had to go back further, to a small town nobody outside its borders had ever heard of, where a young girl named Elena grew up watching her father build something honest from nothing. Peter Voss owned a modest hardware store on the corner of a quiet street. He worked long hours, treated every customer with patience, and taught Elena that integrity mattered more than convenience. She spent afternoons after school helping him organize shelves, learning how numbers told stories long before she understood how important that skill would become. Life was simple then, not easy, but simple. Her father worked hard, her mother taught piano lessons to neighborhood children, and Elena grew up believing the world rewarded honest effort. That belief shattered the year Elena turned 16. A group of men connected to a growing criminal network began pressuring local business owners into paying for protection they never asked for and never needed. Peter Voss refused at first, believing the police would help him, believing the law existed to protect people like him. He was wrong. Within months, unexplained debts appeared on his accounts. Suppliers stopped delivering goods. Customers stopped coming, frightened away by rumors spread deliberately to ruin his reputation. Elena watched her father grow smaller each day, watched the confident man who once fixed broken machines with steady hands become someone burdened by exhaustion and fear. The hardware store closed within a year. Elena never forgot the sound of the metal gate rolling down for the final time, the quiet finality of it, the way her father stood there afterward without saying a word. Years later, after finishing her studies in finance and accounting, Elena discovered through old records and careful research that the men who destroyed her father's business had connections tracing directly back to the Moretti organization, an empire that had grown far larger and far more dangerous in the years since. She could have walked away. Most people would have. Instead, something inside her decided that quiet business owners like her father deserved better than being crushed under the weight of powerful men who believed themselves untouchable. Elena spent nearly a year building a new identity, studying everything she could about corporate structures, financial concealment methods, and how organizations like the Moretti family hid illegal profits behind legitimate-looking businesses. She worked ordinary accounting jobs, building a reputation for precision and discretion, waiting for the right opportunity. That opportunity arrived when the Moretti organization needed a new financial associate for one of their restaurant holding companies, a position that appeared entirely legal on paper, hiding the true purpose behind polished paperwork and respectable job titles. Elena applied under her real name, using a carefully constructed professional history designed to appear impressive without inviting suspicion. She interviewed with a man named Victor Callahan, a senior advisor within the organization who handled hiring for their financial division. Victor was sharp, cautious, and skeptical of new hires, but Elena's calm confidence and flawless understanding of financial regulations impressed him enough to recommend her for the position. Within weeks, she was working inside one of the organization's legitimate-looking offices, reviewing spreadsheets that told a much darker story, once she understood how to read between the lines. It took months before she gained enough trust to access more sensitive files. She spent long nights memorizing patterns, cross-referencing accounts, learning names and relationships that connected seemingly unrelated businesses into one enormous web of concealment. During this time, Elena reached out cautiously to federal authorities, eventually connecting with Agent Nathan Cole, an experienced investigator who had spent years trying to build a case against the Moretti organization without success. Previous attempts to infiltrate the group had failed, sometimes with tragic consequences for those involved. Nathan was skeptical at first, wary of trusting someone who had walked directly into danger without any protection. But Elena's information proved accurate time and again, and slowly, carefully, trust developed between them. Elena continued working inside the organization, attending events, smiling through conversations with people who would have destroyed her without hesitation if they discovered her true purpose. She learned to hide her emotions completely, to nod along with conversations that made her stomach turn, to celebrate alongside people who had built their fortunes on the suffering of families like her own. The gala where Dante humiliated her was not the first time she had been treated as insignificant. It happened often, in smaller ways. Comments about her background, jokes about her modest beginnings, reminders from powerful people that she existed in their world only because they allowed it. She endured all of it, reminding herself constantly of the larger purpose behind her patience. But something about that particular night felt different. Perhaps it was the size of the audience, the deliberate cruelty in Dante's tone, the casual way he dismissed her value in front of people who mattered most within the organization. Whatever the reason, that humiliation became the final piece that pushed Elena to complete what she had been building towards for 2 long years. In the days following that gala, Elena worked carefully alongside Nathan Cole and a small, trusted team of federal investigators to finalize the case against the Moretti organization. Every account she provided, every document, every recorded conversation, contributed to a picture too complete and too damning to ignore. Meanwhile, inside the Moretti household, life continued, as though nothing had changed. Dante spent his days confident in his authority, unaware that the woman he mocked in front of everyone held enough evidence to dismantle everything he had built. Victor Callahan, the advisor who had originally hired Elena, occasionally praised her work ethic during meetings, unaware that her diligence had a purpose far beyond simple job performance. Grace Whitfield, The security associate who checked on Elena after the humiliation remained one of the few people within the organization who treated her with genuine kindness, never suspecting the danger hidden behind Elena's calm exterior. Elena carried the weight of this double life every single day, balancing genuine human connections with the knowledge that she was working toward the downfall of the very people she interacted with regularly. It was a difficult, isolating existence, one that required constant vigilance and emotional control. But she never lost sight of why she started this journey. Every ledger entry she memorized, every account she traced, every risk she took brought her closer to justice for her father and countless others who had suffered under the weight of an organization built on fear and exploitation. The humiliation at the gala was meant to diminish her in front of everyone who mattered within the Moretti world. Instead, it became the spark that finally set her long-planned mission into motion. 2 years of patience, sacrifice, and careful preparation were about to collide with a single moment of arrogance from a man who believed himself untouchable. Dante Moretti had no idea that his casual cruelty had just triggered the beginning of his own downfall, and within days, the consequences of that single decision would ripple through every corner of the empire he believed was unshakable. 3 days after Elena handed over the drive, the city woke up to sirens. It began before sunrise, when unmarked vehicles surrounded a warehouse on the industrial side of town, one of several properties officially listed under a shipping company, but used quietly by the Moretti organization to move goods nobody was ever supposed to inspect too closely. Federal agents moved in coordinated waves, securing exits, confiscating computers, and detaining anyone found on site. At the same time, similar operations unfolded across the city. A restaurant chain that served as a front for laundering money was raided during breakfast preparation, staff and managers questioned, while investigators combed through back offices, searching for hidden ledgers. A small accounting firm connected to several shell companies was shut down within hours, employees stunned as agents carried out boxes of files. Victor Callahan received the first phone call just after 6 in the morning. He sat up in bed, listening to a trembling voice on the other end explain that federal agents had taken control of the warehouse. He asked no questions, hung up the phone, and immediately called Dante. Dante Moretti answered groggily, annoyed at being woken so early. Victor's voice was tight with urgency. "We have a problem," he said. "A serious one." Within 20 minutes, Dante was dressed and standing in his private office, phone pressed against his ear, as reports came in from every direction. Properties frozen, accounts locked, associates detained for questioning. It felt like the ground had shifted beneath him overnight, and he could not understand how something this coordinated had happened without warning. He called his lawyer, a composed and experienced man named Daniel Pierce, who arrived within the hour looking as unsettled as Dante had ever seen him. "This is not a routine investigation," Daniel explained, spreading printed documents across the desk. "This looks like federal agents had access to detailed financial records, account numbers, transaction histories, property ownership structures. Someone gave them a roadmap." Dante's expression darkened. Someone inside. Word spread quickly through the organization that something had gone terribly wrong. Associates who once carried themselves with confidence now spoke in hushed, nervous tones, glancing over their shoulders, as though federal agents might appear at any moment. Grace Whitfield, usually calm and composed in her security role, spent the entire morning fielding frantic calls from employees asking what was happening. Marcus Whitfield, her brother and one of Dante's closest and most loyal associates, arrived at the office looking pale and exhausted. He had spent the night attempting to reach contacts across the city, only to discover that several key partners had already been questioned or detained. "This is bad," Marcus said, pacing across the room. "Whoever did this knew exactly where to look. This was not luck. This was planned." Dante sat in silence, his mind working through every person who had access to sensitive information. He thought of his accountants, his lawyers, his most trusted associates. Nobody stood out immediately, and that uncertainty frightened him more than anything else. Over the following days, the situation continued to worsen. More properties were seized. More associates were questioned. Federal investigators appeared to know details about transactions that had taken place years earlier, details that only someone with deep access to internal records could have known. Dante called an emergency meeting inside a private room at one of the few restaurants not yet affected by the raids. Around the table sat his most trusted people, including Victor Callahan, Marcus Whitfield, and a handful of senior associates who had been with the organization for years. "Someone in this room, or someone connected to this room, betrayed us," Dante said, his voice low and controlled despite the fury simmering beneath the surface. "I want to know who." The room fell into uncomfortable silence. Nobody wanted to be the first to speak, knowing that suspicion alone could be dangerous in an organization already unraveling under pressure. Victor finally broke the silence. "Whoever did this had access to years of financial records," he said carefully. "That narrows the list considerably. It has to be someone from the financial division." Dante's eyes moved slowly around the table, considering every accountant, every advisor, every person who had ever touched the organization's most sensitive documents. He thought of the recent hires, the quiet, unassuming employees who worked long hours without complaint, people he rarely paid attention to because they seemed harmless. He thought of Elena Voss. The thought crossed his mind only briefly before he dismissed it. She had always seemed too quiet, too unremarkable to be involved in something this significant. He remembered mocking her at the gala just days earlier, remembered how she had simply set down her glass and walked away without a word. Surely someone capable of orchestrating something this complex would have reacted differently. He pushed the thought aside and focused instead on more obvious suspects, associates who had recently shown signs of financial trouble or personal grievances against the organization. Meanwhile, Elena continued attending work as though nothing unusual was happening, arriving early each morning, completing her tasks with the same quiet precision she always had. It required immense discipline to maintain this composure, while watching the organization she had spent 2 years infiltrating begin to collapse around her. Nathan Cole contacted her cautiously through their established secure channel, warning her that the investigation was progressing faster than expected and that she needed to remain careful, avoiding anything that might draw unwanted attention. "Stay calm," he told her during a brief, carefully arranged meeting at a quiet park away from prying eyes. "Do not change your routine. Do not let anyone suspect anything is different." Elena nodded, though the tension of the situation weighed heavily on her. Each day at the office felt like walking through a building that could collapse at any moment, and she understood that a single mistake could cost her everything she had worked toward. As the investigation progressed, additional evidence continued surfacing, connecting Dante directly to serious criminal activity spanning years. Financial records revealed elaborate schemes designed to disguise illegal profits as legitimate business revenue. Property records showed suspicious transactions involving offshore accounts and shell companies registered under false identities. Communication records, carefully preserved through Elena's meticulous documentation, revealed conversations discussing activities that went far beyond simple financial misconduct. Federal prosecutors, led by an experienced attorney named Claire Bennett, began building a case strong enough to ensure that Dante Moretti would face significant consequences for his actions. Claire had spent years pursuing organized criminal networks, and she recognized immediately that the evidence gathered against Dante represented one of the most significant cases of her career. "This is comprehensive," she told Nathan Cole during an early briefing. "Whoever gathered this information understood exactly what we needed to build an airtight case." Nathan nodded, careful not to reveal too many details about Elena's involvement, protecting her identity as much as possible during this critical stage of the investigation. Back within the organization, paranoia continued spreading. Associates who had once trusted each other completely now eyed one another with suspicion, wondering who among them might be responsible for the devastating leak of information. Meetings grew tense, conversations guarded, and the confident atmosphere that once defined the Moretti organization slowly transformed into something fractured and uncertain. Dante grew increasingly frustrated as each passing day brought new complications. Legal fees mounted. Business operations ground to a halt as authorities continued freezing assets connected to the organization. Associates who once respected his authority began quietly distancing themselves, unwilling to remain closely associated with someone under such intense scrutiny. During a private conversation with Daniel Pierce, Dante voiced his growing frustration. "Someone close to me did this," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I want a name." Daniel, careful and measured as always, reminded him that pursuing this line of thinking recklessly could create additional legal complications. "We need to focus on damage control first," Daniel advised. "Chasing suspicions without evidence will only create more problems." But Dante could not let go of the growing certainty that someone within his inner circle had betrayed him. He began reviewing recent hires more carefully, examining employment records, cross-referencing schedules and access permissions across the financial division. It was during this careful review that Marcus Whitfield noticed something that caught his attention. Elena Voss had left the gala early on the night Dante humiliated her, and according to security records, she had not returned any calls or messages from colleagues checking on her well-being that same evening. Marcus mentioned this detail casually during a meeting with Dante and Victor, unaware of how significant this small observation would become. "She left early that night," Marcus said. "Grace tried reaching her afterward and never heard back until the following day." Dante's expression shifted slightly, though he said nothing at first. He remembered mocking Elena in front of everyone, remembered how she had simply walked away without reacting the way most people would have. He remembered thinking, in that brief moment, that her calmness seemed unusual. He dismissed the thought once again, unable to fully believe that the quiet accountant he barely noticed could be responsible for orchestrating something this sophisticated. But the seed of suspicion had been planted, and over the following days, it continued to grow, quietly, steadily, until Dante found himself unable to ignore it any longer. 10 days after the raids began, Dante sat alone in his study, staring at a printed employment file with Elena's photograph clipped to the corner. He had asked Victor to quietly pull records on every employee in the financial division, cross-referencing hire dates, access levels, and personal backgrounds. Most files told predictable stories. Elena's file told something else entirely. Her employment history, though professionally presented, contained gaps that seemed unusual under closer inspection. A previous employer listed on her resume no longer existed, dissolved years earlier under circumstances nobody had bothered to verify at the time of her hiring. A reference letter, when checked again, led to a phone number that rang without answer. Dante's hands tightened around the papers. He called Marcus into his study and slid the file across the desk. "Look into her," he said, quietly. "I want to know everything about Elena Voss before I do anything else." Marcus spent the following 2 days digging carefully, avoiding anything that might alert Elena to the investigation happening around her. He discovered fragments of information that, individually, seemed harmless, but together painted a troubling picture. A visit to a small town connected to a hardware store that had closed years earlier under suspicious financial pressure. A background that traced back to a family whose business had been destroyed by debts linked, indirectly, to associates once connected with the Moretti organization. When Marcus presented these findings to Dante, the room fell into heavy silence. "This cannot be a coincidence," Marcus said quietly. Dante's jaw tightened. "Where is she right now?" "At the office, still working normally," Marcus answered. "She has no idea we are looking into her." Dante considered his next move carefully. Acting rashly could expose the organization to even greater risk, but waiting felt unbearable, given how close he now believed he was to identifying the person responsible for his downfall. That evening, Dante arranged for Elena to be brought to a private property outside the city, a quiet house rarely used by the organization, chosen specifically because it offered privacy away from prying eyes or unwanted attention. He told her only that an urgent financial matter needed clarification, careful to keep his tone calm enough to avoid raising suspicion. Elena arrived at the property just after sunset, stepping out of the car into a quiet courtyard surrounded by tall trees. Something about the silence of the place immediately put her on alert, though she kept her expression composed as she walked toward the front door. Inside, Dante waited alone in a dimly lit room, Victor standing quietly near the window, Marcus positioned near the door. The atmosphere felt heavy the moment Elena stepped inside. "Please, sit," Dante said, his voice deceptively calm. Elena remained standing, her eyes moving carefully between the 3 men in the room. "What is this about?" she asked, keeping her tone steady, despite the tension building inside her. Dante studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I think you already know," he said. 2 years is a long time to maintain a lie this carefully. Elena's heart pounded, though she forced herself to remain outwardly composed. I do not understand what you mean, she said. Dante rose from his chair slowly, walking toward her with measured steps. Your father owned a hardware store, he said. A business destroyed years ago by people connected to organizations like mine. You applied for this job under your real name, believing nobody would ever bother connecting those details together. You were wrong. Elena said nothing, her mind working quickly, calculating every possible outcome of this confrontation. You gave federal authorities everything, didn't you? Dante continued, his voice rising with barely controlled anger. Every account, every transaction. Years of records handed over the moment I embarrassed you in front of everyone. Elena finally spoke, her voice calm despite the danger surrounding her. You embarrassed yourself the moment you decided cruelty was an acceptable way to treat people you consider beneath you, she said. I simply made sure there would be consequences for choices you made long before that night. Dante's expression twisted with fury. Do you understand what you have done? He said. Everything I built, everything my family created over decades, you destroyed it because of a single comment at a party. Elena held his gaze without flinching. I destroyed nothing that was not already built on exploiting people who could not defend themselves, she said. My father lost everything, because of decisions made by people exactly like you. I simply made certain the truth finally came to light. The room fell into tense silence. Victor and Marcus exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how this confrontation would unfold. Dante took another step closer, his voice dropping into something colder and more dangerous. You think this ends here, he said. You think handing over some files changes what happens next. Elena remained perfectly still. I think you should look outside, she said calmly. Dante frowned, confusion flickering across his face for the first time. Elena continued, her voice steady. This conversation has been recorded from the moment I walked through that door, she said. Federal agents have been monitoring this property for the past hour, waiting for confirmation that you would reveal exactly what I needed them to hear. Dante's face went pale as the sound of vehicles approaching the property became audible through the quiet night air. Victor rushed to the window, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as headlights illuminated the courtyard outside. They are here, Victor said, his voice tight with panic. Multiple vehicles. Marcus moved toward the door, though it was already too late. Federal agents, led by Nathan Cole himself, moved swiftly into the property, securing every exit before Dante or his associates could react. Dante turned back toward Elena, disbelief and fury mixing across his expression. You planned this from the beginning, he said. Elena met his gaze without hesitation. I planned this since the day your organization destroyed my family, she said. Tonight simply confirmed everything federal investigators already suspected. Agents moved into the room, securing Dante, Victor, and Marcus without resistance, the three men too stunned by the sudden turn of events to react in any meaningful way. Nathan Cole approached Elena carefully, confirming her safety before overseeing the arrests taking place around them. Are you all right? Nathan asked quietly. Elena nodded slowly, watching as Dante was led out of the house in handcuffs, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by stunned disbelief at how quickly everything had unraveled. I am fine, she said. It is finally over. As Dante was escorted past her toward the waiting vehicle outside, he paused for a brief moment, staring at her with an expression that carried both anger and something close to reluctant recognition. You could have simply stayed quiet, he said. Kept working, kept your secret, and none of this would have happened tonight. Elena held his gaze steadily. I could have, she said, but you decided cruelty was an acceptable way to treat someone you believed powerless. That decision cost you everything. Dante said nothing further as agents guided him toward the vehicle, the reality of his situation finally settling over him. Victor and Marcus followed shortly after, both men silent, understanding fully that the empire they had helped build was now completely beyond saving. Elena stood in the quiet courtyard long after the vehicles disappeared into the night, finally allowing herself a moment to process everything that had just happened. 2 years of careful planning, patience, and quiet determination had led to this single moment, and though relief washed over her, she understood that the most difficult part of this journey, testifying against the very organization she had infiltrated, still remained ahead of her. Nathan approached her gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You did something remarkable tonight," he said. "Something very few people would have had the courage to attempt." Elena managed a tired smile. "I just wanted justice," she said quietly. "For my father. For everyone else who suffered because people like Dante believed themselves untouchable." As they walked back toward the waiting vehicles, Elena glanced one final time at the now empty property, understanding that this chapter of her life was finally closing, even as an entirely new one, filled with legal proceedings and public scrutiny, was just beginning. The months following the arrest passed quickly, filled with legal preparations, depositions, and careful coordination between Elena, Nathan Cole, and the prosecution team led by Claire Bennett. The case against Dante Moretti had grown into one of the most significant organized crime prosecutions the city had seen in years, drawing attention from news outlets and legal experts across the country. Claire worked tirelessly to organize the overwhelming amount of evidence Elena had gathered, structuring the case in a way that would be clear and compelling for a jury unfamiliar with complex financial concepts. Elena spent countless hours reviewing documents alongside the prosecution team, ensuring every detail remained accurate and every explanation clear enough for the courtroom. Meanwhile, Dante remained in custody, his once unshakable confidence steadily eroding as the reality of his situation became increasingly clear. Daniel Pierce, his lawyer, worked diligently to explore every possible legal strategy, though even he privately acknowledged the strength of the evidence against his client. Victor Callahan and Marcus Whitfield, both facing separate legal consequences for their roles within the organization, found themselves at a crossroads. Facing significant potential sentences, both men eventually agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced consequences, providing additional testimony that further strengthened the case against Dante. Grace Whitfield, devastated by her brother's involvement in the organization's illegal activities, distanced herself entirely from the situation, focusing instead on rebuilding her own life, away from the chaos that had consumed everyone around her. As the trial date approached, Elena found herself preparing not just legally, but emotionally, for the moment she would finally stand in a courtroom and speak openly about everything she had endured over the past 2 years. The idea of confronting Dante directly, without the secrecy that had defined their entire relationship, filled her with a mixture of anxiety and determination. Nathan Cole remained a steady presence throughout this period, checking in regularly, ensuring Elena had the support she needed as she navigated this unfamiliar and challenging chapter of her life. "You have already done the hardest part," he reminded her during one of their final preparation sessions before the trial began. "All that remains now is telling the truth." The trial began on a bright morning, the courtroom filled with journalists, legal observers, and members of the public eager to witness the proceedings against a man once considered untouchable. Dante sat beside Daniel Pierce, his expression carefully controlled, though the tension in his posture betrayed the pressure he felt beneath the surface. Claire Bennett opened the prosecution's case with a clear, methodical presentation of the evidence, walking the jury through years of financial records, property transactions, and communications that painted an undeniable picture of organized criminal activity spanning nearly a decade. When Elena took the stand, the courtroom fell into complete silence. She spoke calmly, clearly, and confidently, walking the jury through her discovery of illegal financial patterns, the careful process of gathering evidence, and the ultimate decision to bring everything to federal authorities. Daniel Pierce, during cross-examination, attempted to challenge her credibility, questioning her motivations, and suggesting that personal grievances against Dante had influenced her actions. Elena responded with unwavering composure. "My personal history gave me the determination to pursue this investigation," she said. "It did not influence the accuracy of a single document or transaction I provided. Every piece of evidence speaks for itself." Her testimony, combined with corroborating statements from Victor Callahan and Marcus Whitfield, along with the overwhelming documentary evidence gathered over 2 years, created a case that proved impossible for the defense to meaningfully challenge. Over the following weeks, the trial continued, with additional witnesses, financial experts, and law enforcement officials providing further context and validation for the evidence presented. Dante's confidence, once unshakable, continued to deteriorate as the case against him grew increasingly difficult to dispute. Finally, after extensive deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. Guilty on every count, including racketeering, extensive financial fraud, and conspiracy charges connected to years of illegal activity conducted under the guise of legitimate business operations. The courtroom remained silent as the verdict was read, the weight of the moment settling over everyone present. Dante sat motionless, staring straight ahead, the reality of his situation finally impossible to ignore or escape. During sentencing, Judge Harold Doyle addressed the courtroom directly, acknowledging the significant harm caused by Dante's actions over many years, harm that extended far beyond financial losses to include the destruction of families and small businesses across the region. The consequences of choices made in positions of power extend far beyond the individuals directly involved, Judge Doyle stated. This case represents not just financial misconduct, but a pattern of exploitation that caused real, lasting damage to real people. Dante was sentenced to a significant prison term, effectively ending his ability to ever again exert influence over the organization he once controlled with absolute authority. As he was led out of the courtroom, he glanced briefly toward Elena, seated among witnesses and legal representatives. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and though no words were exchanged, the understanding between them was clear. The woman he had once dismissed as insignificant, mocked in front of an entire room of powerful people, had ultimately become the architect of his complete downfall. Following the conclusion of the trial, Elena's role in bringing down one of the region's most significant criminal organizations became public knowledge, drawing attention from media outlets eager to share her story. She approached this newfound attention with the same quiet composure that had defined her entire journey, granting limited interviews focused primarily on encouraging others facing similar injustices to seek help through proper legal channels, rather than remaining silent. Nathan Cole, reflecting on the case during a private conversation with Elena after the trial concluded, expressed genuine admiration for her courage and determination throughout the entire process. "Not many people would have had the strength to do what you did," he said. 2 years of living a double life, constantly at risk, all to bring justice for something that happened years earlier. Elena considered his words carefully before responding. "I did it for my father," she said. "For every family destroyed by people who believed themselves untouchable. I could not change what happened to us, but I could make certain the people responsible finally faced consequences for their actions." In the months following the trial, Elena gradually returned to a quieter, more private life, finally free from the constant vigilance and emotional strain that had defined the past 2 years. She used her experience and expertise to work with organizations dedicated to helping small business owners protect themselves against financial exploitation, channeling her difficult journey into something meaningful and constructive. Grace Whitfield, having distanced herself entirely from the organization's remnants, reached out to Elena months later, expressing gratitude for the courage Elena had shown, despite the personal connection they had once shared during Elena's time working within the organization. "I understand now why you could not tell me the truth," Grace said during their conversation. "I am grateful someone finally had the courage to end all of it." Elena accepted her words graciously, understanding the complicated emotions involved in rebuilding trust and relationships after such a significant upheaval. Reflecting on the entire journey, from the moment Dante humiliated her in front of an entire room of powerful associates to the final verdict that ended his reign of influence permanently, Elena recognized how a single moment of cruelty had ultimately accelerated a reckoning that had been building for years. Dante Moretti had believed, in that moment at the gala, that publicly belittling a quiet accountant carried no real consequences, confident in his position of power and authority. He never imagined that the woman he dismissed as insignificant held the evidence and determination necessary to dismantle everything he had built. By the time he understood the truth, it was already far too late to change the outcome. His empire, built over years through fear and exploitation, crumbled entirely because of choices he made believing himself completely untouchable. Elena Voss, once dismissed as nothing more than a background presence within a powerful organization, ultimately proved to be the very force that brought that entire empire crashing down, delivering long overdue justice for her father, for countless other families affected by similar exploitation, and for herself. The story of her quiet courage, patience, and unwavering determination stood as a powerful reminder that true strength often exists in the most unexpected places, and that even the most powerful people can find themselves brought down by the very individuals they once believed too insignificant to matter.